The Dominion's war fleet arrived in the Sol system like a tidal wave of steel and fire. Thousands of warships, each the size of a city, drifted into position around Earth, their weapons humming with barely contained destruction. The flagship, an obsidian leviathan known as the Unyielding Wrath, took its place at the head of the invasion force, its presence a silent declaration that resistance was pointless. From orbit, Grand Warlord Sol Zareth observed the blue-green world below with cold amusement. Humanity was primitive by Dominion standards, barely a few centuries into space travel, armed with laughable weapons and fragile ships. There was no war to be fought here, only an execution. He clasped his clawed hands behind his back and turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast the surrender demand," he commanded, his voice a measured growl. "Standard terms. They kneel or they burn." A pulse of energy rippled through the fleet as the transmission was sent. Across Earth, every screen, every radio, every satellite picked up the message. A towering figure appeared, clad in ornate armor, his reptilian eyes glowing with imperial authority. His voice was deep, resonant, and filled with absolute certainty. "People of Earth, you stand at the precipice of history. Before you is a choice that thousands of species have faced before. Surrender, and you will be allowed to serve under the Dominion's rule. Resist, and your world will be reduced to cinders. You have one planetary rotation to comply. Choose wisely." Silence followed. Sol Zareth smirked. This was always the moment when civilizations realized their place. Some, like the Vrathians, had tried to fight back. They had been exterminated. Others, like the Tyrax, had surrendered immediately and now served as willing thralls. Humanity would do the same. They had no other option. But something was wrong. The expected panic did not come. Dominion sensors scanned Earth's cities, but there were no mass evacuations, no desperate attempts to flee. Instead, power grids surged to life, encrypted transmissions flared across the planet, and military installations activated. Humanity was not preparing to surrender. Then came the response. It was a simple message, broadcast across every Dominion frequency, a human voice, calm and unwavering. "We decline." Sol Zareth frowned. He turned to his officers, waiting for an explanation, but before they could respond, Dominion ships across the fleet began reporting system errors. Navigation data was scrambled. Long-range scanners flickered with static. Some ships lost power entirely, their engines sputtering as though unseen hands were tearing into their systems. A warning klaxon blared aboard the Unyielding Wrath. The fleet's artificial intelligence, considered flawless by Dominion engineers, had been breached. Data flooded their networks, overwhelming firewalls, rewriting codes, twisting their own systems against them. Ships drifted out of formation. Weapons locked onto friendly targets. Chaos spread in mere seconds. Sol Zareth's amusement vanished. He had expected fear. He had expected desperation. Instead, he was staring into the abyss of something far more dangerous. Humanity was not going to surrender. And they had just made the first move. The Dominion's armada was crippled before they could even make their first strike. What had started as a minor glitch spiraled into full-blown chaos. Dominion warships, which had been poised to obliterate humanity's defenses, now floated helplessly in the void. Their systems were being attacked from within, not by physical weapons, but through the very digital veins that powered their fleet. Sol Zareth stood in the command center of the Unyielding Wrath, his claws gripping the edge of the tactical display as his officers scrambled to restore order. A series of rapid updates flashed across the screen. Several warships had lost power. Others were reporting distorted communications. The flagship's own artificial intelligence, designed to be a paragon of efficiency, was stuttering, unable to process the rapidly changing data. "This is impossible," muttered one of the senior engineers, his voice a tremor of disbelief. "The protocols should be impenetrable." Sol Zareth's eyes narrowed. His heart pulsed with rage, but even more so with a cold realization. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an accident. Humanity was doing this. They had hacked their systems. Scramble the countermeasures. Zal-Zareth barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Deploy all security programs. Close the channels. Lock everything down. But it was too late. The fleet was already spiraling into disorder. Ships that had been expected to strike Earth's defenses now drifted aimlessly, their crew helpless to regain control. Meanwhile, the human broadcasts continued, calm, steady, and entirely unbothered. "We decline," repeated the human voice, over and over, echoing across the network. "You thought we would surrender. We're not your prey." Zal-Zareth's vision blurred for a moment. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his centuries of experience slip through his fingers. The humans had not just defied him. They had embarrassed him. They had taken control of his fleet in ways no enemy had ever even attempted. On Earth, the global leadership was not waiting in terror, as Zal-Zareth had expected. Instead, they were mobilizing, their efforts coordinated and precise. National defense networks sprang to life, their codes now encrypted against Dominion interference. Governments set aside differences, and military units across the world began working together, preparing for an enemy that they had no reason to believe could ever be defeated. In Earth's orbit, a small human fleet of warships, barely larger than the average Dominion destroyer, launched from hidden dockyards beneath the moon's surface. These ships, stealthily designed and adapted from salvaged Dominion technology, were now the spearhead of Earth's defense. Their cannons fired, sending out precise bursts of energy that disabled Dominion ships in the distance. The attacks were subtle, calculated, their target not just the enemy's hulls but their very infrastructure, power cores, communication systems, energy conduits. Zal-Zareth's mind raced as he stared at the screen, watching as his forces disintegrated before his eyes. These humans, these primitive creatures, were no longer just defending their home. They were turning his own weapons against him. "Find their source," he roared, slamming a fist onto the console. "Whoever is behind this must be silenced." But even as the command was given, a chilling realization gripped him. The more he ordered, the more he understood. The humans had not simply hacked into his fleet. They had taken over his mind. They knew the rules of war, the very pulse of his empire, better than he could ever have imagined. They had already rewritten the game, and they weren't going to stop. The warlords who had watched from their distant homeworlds now felt the tremors. The Dominion was facing a power it had never considered. Humanity was playing a game that no one else knew how to win. And this first move, this unexpected, devastating blow, was only the beginning. The Dominion's fleet was beginning to crack. Reports from every corner of their invasion force were pouring in, each more disjointed than the last. At first, the disruptions had seemed like isolated incidents, small glitches that would soon be fixed. But now, it was clear. This wasn't a random malfunction. It was an attack. And it was coming from somewhere they couldn't pinpoint. Zal-Zareth watched in growing fury as one of his flagship's senior officers was dragged into the room, disheveled and wide-eyed. His voice was trembling with disbelief as he recounted the events. "My lord, we lost an entire division. One moment, they were on approach to Earth's lunar base. The next, they vanished. No trace, no signal, nothing." Zal-Zareth stood in silence, his tail flicking with agitation. The officer's report was just the latest in a long line of failures. The more they tried to regain control, the more their forces slipped away, like sand through their fingers. "We've been hit by a ghost," the officer added, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like they've learned how to become invisible." Zal-Zareth's eyes narrowed. He had fought against many species in his long reign, but none had ever done something like this. The humans were not attacking directly. They were disappearing. Their tactics were so subtle, so insidious, that the Dominion could hardly believe it. Across the Sol system, entire Dominion battalions had been lost without a single shot fired. One by one, their ships had simply disappeared. No signs of battle, No debris, no wreckage, just empty space where once there had been massive warships. Some of the ships had been silent for hours before vanishing, while others had simply slipped out of radar range and never returned. Zal-Zareth ordered a full-scale investigation. He sent his most trusted commanders to lead deep searches for any clues. What they found was both terrifying and perplexing. Entire fleets had been lured into gravitational anomalies, where their sensors became useless. Others had been drawn into electromagnetic storms, strange, unnatural surges of energy that were unlike anything in Dominion records. None of it made sense, and the longer the investigation dragged on, the more Zal-Zareth began to understand. The humans were not fighting the way they were supposed to. They had no massive fleets or overwhelming firepower. They didn't need to. They were hunting, not battling, and they were doing it with methods that defied anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Back on Earth, the situation was even stranger. Humanity wasn't only defending their homeworld, they were actively hunting down and eliminating the Dominion's resources. A covert strike team had infiltrated one of the largest Dominion supply hubs, hidden in the asteroid belt, sabotaging every piece of equipment they could find. Within hours, the entire station had been rendered inoperable. No explosion, no visible damage, just an utter collapse of functionality. Even more alarming, the Dominion's intelligence networks were slowly being poisoned. Every command, every order that passed through their systems was intercepted and altered. The Dominion's superior technology had become their greatest weakness, and they were fighting against invisible forces they could neither see nor stop. Zal-Zareth seethed with frustration. He paced through the command center of the unyielding wrath, barking orders at anyone within earshot. Find them. Find anyone responsible for this. I want their heads on a platter. But even as he shouted, he knew this wasn't a battle he could win by force. The humans were no longer fighting him in the way he understood. They had outsmarted him. They were everywhere and nowhere. They had become the shadows in the void, striking at his fleet and slipping away without a trace. For the first time in his life, Zal-Zareth realized he wasn't in control. And if he didn't figure out how to counter this new kind of war, his empire would be reduced to nothing but a footnote in history. The humans had already changed the rules, and he was running out of time to learn how to play. Zal-Zareth sat in the command chair of the unyielding wrath, his mind racing as another report came in. It was becoming increasingly clear that his forces were being torn apart by something unseen. A growing sense of panic began to grip the fleet. The humans, with their primitive technology, were outwitting the most advanced empire in the galaxy. It was almost absurd. The warlord clenched his fists, his claws digging into the armrests. "They are toying with us," he growled, barely able to keep his anger in check. What kind of species attacks without a single direct confrontation? His most trusted advisor, a sharp-minded strategist named Solan, approached cautiously. She was one of the few who had not yet fallen prey to the paranoia gripping the Dominion. "My lord," she began, her tone measured, "it's possible that we're underestimating them. These humans, they don't fight like anyone we've encountered before. Perhaps they're using methods we don't understand." Zal-Zareth glared at her. "They're just animals, Slan. How can a primitive species with no advanced technologies do this?" Slan's eyes glinted with a dangerous intelligence. What if their technology isn't the key? What if it's their minds? What if they've learned to use warfare in ways that we can't even comprehend? Zal-Zareth stiffened. Her words struck a nerve. In all his years of conquest, he had never faced an enemy that fought like this. He had never had to deal with an enemy that didn't follow the rules of war. They didn't need overwhelming firepower. They didn't need massive fleets or superweapons. All they needed was their ability to manipulate the battlefield itself. The next transmission confirmed his worst fears. Entire Dominion battalions had defected. This wasn't just sabotage, it was betrayal. Some of the fleets had simply vanished. They had turned on their own commanders, convinced by what they believed were human tactics. The transmissions were confusing, unclear, but the gist was undeniable. The Dominion was losing its grip on its own forces. "This is insurrection," Xal'Zareth muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The soldiers think they can win by joining the humans. They've been converted somehow." Salan nodded grimly. "It's not just that, my lord. It's the information. The humans have flooded our systems with misinformation, twisting the truth, feeding us false reports, manipulating us into mistakes. They know how to play the game of the mind." Xal'Zareth stood, his tail lashing with fury. "They are deceiving us. They are turning our own soldiers against us. But they will not break me. We will crush them before they can win." But deep inside, Xal'Zareth felt something shift, a nagging doubt that began to eat at the edges of his mind. He had never faced an enemy like this. His greatest strength was his ability to outthink his opponents, to predict their every move. Yet here, against the humans, it was as if the rules had been rewritten. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human governments were beginning to realize something equally disconcerting. The Dominion wasn't just falling apart in space. They were disintegrating from within. The human resistance, far from being a ragtag group of survivors, was orchestrating one of the most brilliant psychological operations in the history of warfare. It wasn't just technology that had tipped the scales in humanity's favor. It was their understanding of the mind, the ability to manipulate perception, to plant ideas where there were none, to create an environment where the Dominion's own troops began to doubt their leaders. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were reshaping the very fabric of the Dominion's empire. For every act of sabotage, there was a whisper of rebellion. For every battle lost, there was a message that reinforced the doubt creeping into the minds of Dominion soldiers. The warlords were losing control of their fleet, and no matter how many reinforcements they called for, it was becoming clear. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They were controlling the battlefield not with weapons, but with ideas. Xal'Zareth clenched his teeth. "Find them. Find whoever is responsible for this. I want them in front of me." But even as he gave the order, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the humans were never fighting the way he understood? What if the battle had already been lost, and he hadn't even realized it yet? Xal'Zareth was losing control, and the realization gnawed at him every waking moment. The fear, once a distant feeling in the back of his mind, now thrummed through his veins. His most trusted commanders, those who had once stood at the pinnacle of Dominion power, were now questioning his orders. His officers no longer spoke with confidence, their voices tinged with uncertainty and suspicion. The humans had taken the rules of war and shattered them completely. They had made it clear that they were not fighting for territory, nor were they concerned with grand battles of attrition. They had turned the tide of war with a force Xal'Zareth could not comprehend, psychological manipulation and precision. The Dominion was no longer the hunter. They had become prey. Reports continued to flood in from every corner of the galaxy. More battalions had vanished. Entire fleets were now lost in the void, caught in traps that defied all understanding. The strange anomalies that had once been considered a curiosity were now widespread. Gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic storms, and complete system blackouts were becoming commonplace in the Dominion's territory. Xal'Zareth watched helplessly as the Dominion's once dominant fleet dwindled before his eyes. His mind screamed for answers, for a way to reverse the tide. His pride, his legacy, everything he had built was crumbling. The unyielding wrath itself, a vessel that had been built to inspire fear, now felt like a tomb, its halls echoing with whispers of defeat. And it wasn't just the fleets that were crumbling. The Dominion soldiers, once the most feared warriors in the galaxy, were beginning to defect in droves. The human message, simple yet unyielding, had infiltrated the very core of their forces. Join us, or perish. It was a plea that stirred something deep within the soldiers. The Dominion's empire, built on fear and domination, had never offered such an invitation. They were accustomed to forcing submission, not offering it. Zal-Zareth stared at a transmission from the front lines, a video feed from one of his senior commanders, now a broken man. The video flickered as the man, surrounded by his own disarmed soldiers, spoke with trembling hands. "We can't win this. The humans, they've broken us. We've seen their strength. We've felt their power. We're done." The transmission cut out abruptly, and Zal-Zareth felt the cold grip of panic tighten around his chest. His empire, his glorious empire, was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In Earth's orbit, the human strike teams were becoming more daring. They had discovered the hidden supply chains that sustained the Dominion's war effort and were cutting them off one by one. A strike force, equipped with stolen Dominion technology, infiltrated a deep space station and executed a flawless sabotage operation. Within hours, the station's defense systems shut down, its weapons turned off, and its crew were left stranded in space. But it wasn't just the military targets that humanity had in their sights. The human resistance had expanded beyond Earth's surface. They had infiltrated Dominion communications, flooded their networks with false orders, and redirected military resources. Any attempt at retaliation seemed doomed from the start, as human intelligence operated on a level the Dominion could not match. The Dominion's flagship, the unyielding Wrath, began to feel the pressure. The battle plans that once unfolded with precision now seemed to devolve into chaos. Every strategy was met with unforeseen complications. Every battle was disrupted by sabotage. Every time a fleet prepared to strike, their targets were already gone. Zal-Zareth stood at the helm of his ship, his mind a whirlpool of rage and confusion. He had never felt so powerless in his life. His fingers curled into fists, his claws digging into his palms as he growled in frustration. "We will crush them. We must," he spat. But deep down, he knew the truth. They were no longer the predators in this fight. The humans had taken the role of the hunters, and Zal-Zareth, along with his entire fleet, was their prey. They were everywhere, unseen and untouchable. And no matter how many fleets he sent, no matter how many reinforcements he called for, the humans always seemed to be one step ahead. The hunt was no longer his to command. The battle had changed. And the worst part, Zal-Zareth was beginning to wonder if it was already too late to win. Zal-Zareth stood before the war table, his mind racing with calculations, his pride shattered beyond recognition. The Dominion's once unshakable war machine was in ruins, his fleets shattered, his commanders broken. The soldiers who once believed in the superiority of the Dominion were now questioning their every order. Every day, more of them defected, drawn by the overwhelming power of the human resistance. Zal-Zareth had been a conqueror, a warlord whose name had struck fear into the hearts of countless species. But now, his empire was slipping through his fingers like sand. In desperation, he summoned his closest advisors, hoping for a solution, anything that could turn the tide. Slan, the strategist who had remained by his side through all his conquests, was the first to enter. Her face was grim, the sharp intelligence in her eyes dimmed by the constant stream of bad news. "My lord," she said, her voice calm but tinged with concern, "I believe we have reached the end of the line." Zal-Zareth's eyes snapped to her. "What do you mean?" "I will not accept defeat." "Not yet." Slan bowed her head, her tone measured. "We are running out of options. The humans have infiltrated every possible system we control. Our fleets are scattered, crippled by their relentless tactics. We cannot keep up the chase. They are everywhere and nowhere. They know us better than we know ourselves. They are playing a game we cannot win." For a long moment, there was silence. Zal-Zareth clenched his fists, staring at the glowing holographic map of the galaxy that had once represented his domain. Now it was just a canvas of chaos. The green and red lights that had marked his empire's strength were fading. His control was slipping. "I refuse to lose," Zal-Zareth said through gritted teeth. There has to be something we can do. A final strike. A weapon, anything. Selene paused before replying. We still have one option. One last card to play. Zal-Zareth turned sharply toward her. What is it? We have the Warlord Protocol. She spoke the words slowly, weighing their implications. Zal-Zareth's eyes widened, then narrowed. The Warlord Protocol was a last-ditch weapon, an ancient system designed for the most desperate of times. It was not a traditional weapon. It was a mental amplifier, a device that could enhance the cognitive abilities of the Dominion's best warriors, turning them into living weapons of unimaginable power. It was a gamble, but it could be their only chance to fight back against the humans' relentless assault on their minds. You're suggesting we use the protocol? Zal-Zareth asked, his voice cold. Do you know what that will do? Selene nodded. I do. It's a dangerous move, but it could give us the upper hand. If we can activate it across the fleet and synchronize our forces, we might be able to counter the humans' mental warfare. They rely on confusion, on turning our own against us. The protocol will make us immune to that. We'll be able to think more clearly, act faster, and outmaneuver them. Zal-Zareth's eyes narrowed in thought. He could already feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The Warlord Protocol was not without its risks. It could enhance a warrior's abilities beyond measure, but it also had a tendency to push the mind to its breaking point. The side effects were unpredictable. Some warriors became nothing more than mindless, savage creatures, incapable of distinguishing friend from foe. But for all its dangers, the protocol might be their only hope. He took a deep breath, then looked at Selene with newfound resolve. Prepare the fleet. We're activating the Warlord Protocol. The humans think they've won, but they haven't seen anything yet. As the orders were passed down, the atmosphere aboard the unyielding raft shifted. It was no longer the atmosphere of a fleet on the verge of collapse. Now it was one of grim determination. The Dominion's forces, battered and broken, began to rally behind their warlord. The Warlord Protocol was the last gambit, and it would either break them or destroy the humans once and for all. Zal-Zareth stood tall, staring out into the void, his mind already calculating their next moves. The humans had made a mistake. They had underestimated the Dominion's will to survive. Now, it was time to show them that they had never truly understood the price of victory. The Warlord Protocol had been activated, and for the first time in months, Zal-Zareth felt the weight of command return to his hands. The tremors of fear that had gnawed at him were replaced with the cold certainty of war. The protocol was a double-edged sword. Its effects were unpredictable, but its potential was undeniable. As the fleet synchronized with the enhanced minds of the Dominion's elite warriors, a shift began. The battlefields, which had been filled with chaos and uncertainty, suddenly started to regain a semblance of order. Across the fleet, the warriors who had undergone the protocol were transformed. Their minds were razor-sharp, their reactions instantaneous. Fear, doubt, hesitation, gone. In its place, a relentless drive to destroy. Zal-Zareth watched as his forces began to move with the precision of a well-oiled machine, each ship in the fleet responding to his commands without question. We are ready, Selene said, her voice steady, as she observed the results of the activation. The protocol is working as intended. Our forces are coordinating at a level the humans will not anticipate. Zal-Zareth's lips curled into a cold smile. Good. It's time to end this. The Dominion fleet, once scattered and disjointed, now moved as one. Their new, enhanced mental coordination allowed them to outmaneuver the humans in ways they hadn't been able to before. The first few skirmishes proved their superiority. Dominion warships tore through human defenses with ruthless efficiency, their weapons slicing through shields and hulls as though they were paper. It was a taste of power the Dominion had not felt in months. But even as the Dominion forces surged forward, Zal-Zareth felt a sense of unease creeping over him. The humans weren't retreating. They were adapting. Despite the sudden shift in the battle, the humans were still managing to execute counterattacks with terrifying precision. It was as though they had expected this exact response. Zal-Zareth watched the situation unfold on the holographic map. His fleet was advancing, but the humans were striking back in unexpected ways. The familiar patterns of sabotage and misinformation resurfaced. Fleet commanders began reporting strange disruptions in their communications, their weapons systems behaving erratically, and worse, some of the enhanced warriors themselves began to show signs of instability. The protocol was amplifying their power, but it was also pushing their minds to the edge of collapse. The warriors, once precise and controlled, were starting to fray. Silan, Zal-Zareth growled, his voice low with rising tension. What's happening? The warriors, they are starting to lose focus. Silan's expression hardened. It's the protocol. The enhancement, it's too much for some of them. Their minds are becoming unstable. I warned you, my lord. This is the cost of the warlord protocol. Zal-Zareth clenched his fists, fury and frustration bubbling up inside him. This is not how it's supposed to be. We are supposed to crush them. Why do they keep fighting? Silan's face softened with understanding. Because they're not fighting like us. They fight with conviction. They fight with purpose. They don't rely solely on strength or power. They use their minds, their unity, their will. And that is what makes them so dangerous. Zal-Zareth stared at the map in silence. The humans, against all odds, were not simply defending. They were pushing back. His own fleet was on the edge of disarray, and the humans seemed to be everywhere. He could feel the shift in the air, the moment when the tide could turn once more. The warlord protocol had given his fleet the edge they needed, but it had come with a price. It wasn't just the soldiers affected. As his forces began to falter, Zal-Zareth felt the mental strain on himself too. The protocol had amplified his mind, but it had also begun to stretch him thin. His once unshakable confidence wavered. He had placed his faith in this weapon, and now he was realizing that he too was becoming a puppet to its effects. His focus began to fracture as the pressure mounted, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a storm cloud ready to burst. Silan watched him carefully, then said softly, "My lord, we need to withdraw. The protocol is too unstable. We can't maintain this offensive. It's breaking us." For a long moment, Zal-Zareth did not respond. He looked at the battle unfolding, the humans' relentless push against his forces, and a wave of bitterness washed over him. The very thing that had been his salvation, the protocol, was now a weapon that was consuming him and his army. The humans had taken the fight to a level he had never imagined. They had fought with their minds, and now they were outthinking him at every turn. With great effort, Zal-Zareth straightened. "No, we fight to the end. We will not retreat." The storm was coming, and Zal-Zareth was determined to ride it out, no matter the cost. The void of space was a battlefield like no other. The stars seemed to watch in silence as two empires clashed, one fighting with the raw power of technology, the other with the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Zal-Zareth's fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was now a fractured shadow of its former glory. Despite the enhancements of the warlord protocol, cracks were forming. The Dominion's warriors, once the most disciplined and fearsome, were slipping into madness. Their minds, pushed too far, could no longer maintain the intense clarity they had once enjoyed. The protocol, it seemed, was both their weapon and their undoing. Zal-Zareth stood on the bridge of the unyielding wrath, staring at the holographic display of the battle. His fleet was surrounded. Everywhere he looked, there was a new human strike force, a new counterattack. The once powerful warships of the Dominion were now limping, their systems failing, their ranks thinning. He had underestimated them. He had thought he could outthink them, overpower them, crush them with sheer force. But the humans had played a different game, a game of wills, of hearts, of minds. Their unity, their resilience, it had turned the tide of the war. Now, as his forces faltered, the reality set in. The humans had won. "My lord, Slan's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. She stood before him, her expression grim but resolute. "It's over. We can't sustain this any longer. The fleet is broken. We have to surrender or face total annihilation." Zal-Zareth's gaze remained fixed on the map. His hands, once steady with the power of command, now trembled with the weight of defeat. "I will never surrender," he growled. "We'll fight until the end. This is our empire. It is mine." But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. His empire was a dying beast, struggling to breathe in the face of an enemy it could not understand, let alone defeat. The humans had outlasted them, outwitted them, and in the end, they had brought down the Dominion not with might, but with mind. The holographic display flickered once more, and a new message flashed across the screen. A signal from Earth. Zal-Zareth's heart skipped a beat. The humans were calling for his surrender. They had sent a message to him directly, a final offer of peace. A voice, calm yet piercing, came through the transmission. "Zal-Zareth of the Dominion, we offer you one last choice. Surrender. End this war. You have lost. There is no shame in it. We understand the cost of pride, and we offer you a chance to stand down before the final blow is struck." Zal-Zareth's claws dug into the console before him. His mind, still amplified by the Warlord protocol, screamed with fury and frustration. No, he could not, would not, yield, not to these humans, not after everything he had sacrificed. He had always been the hunter. He would die as the hunter. But as the seconds ticked by, he began to feel a shift, a strange sense of clarity amid the chaos. The protocol had heightened his mind, but it had also made him see something he had never noticed before. The humans had not been the invaders. They had not come to conquer, to destroy. They had come to survive. They had fought not out of greed or ambition, but out of the pure necessity of existence. Perhaps for the first time, Zal-Zareth understood. He understood the humanity that had driven them. He understood the will to survive, the drive to protect everything they held dear. It was at that moment that Zal-Zareth's resolve began to waver. The warlord who had once been invincible was now confronted with the very thing he had never considered: the truth of the enemy's strength. The humans had turned the rules of warfare on their head, and they had done so with nothing but their minds and their hearts. The transmission from Earth was still live, waiting for his answer. The voice spoke once more, softer now. "We are not your enemies, Zal-Zareth. We never were. The war is over. It's time to let it go." For a long, painful moment, Zal-Zareth was silent. He was torn between his pride as a conqueror and the crushing weight of his failure. His mind, heightened by the protocol, searched for a way out, any way to avoid surrender, to avoid the crushing finality of defeat. But there was no escape. Slowly, he looked up from the console, his mind clouded by a mixture of fury, regret, and resignation. I surrender." And with that, the war came to an end. The Dominion had been defeated, not by force, but by the very human qualities Zal-Zareth had underestimated: resilience, unity, and the unbreakable will to survive. The hunter had been hunted, and the rules of the game had been irrevocably changed.